Welcome back to the Stretch 4 podcast, coming at you all live from the studio here in San Francisco, California. It is Tuesday, May 30th. We're all back from the first big holiday of the year, or the summer, Memorial Day weekend. I hope everybody had a safe and relaxing Memorial Day weekend. I spent the weekend, took a short trip down the road here from San Francisco to Monterey with the wife and the little one. Got a chance to do some cool things down there. Didn't get perfect weather, obviously, but we did enjoy getting out of the city. Got back on yesterday and now back to podding. But thank you all for listening to the Stretch 4 podcast. Today's show, we're going to take a look at some things that I experienced last week, part of the founder journey, the highs and lows of being an early stage startup founder. We'll talk a bit about a company, Plastiq, which actually went bankrupt last week. We'll get into that and understand what happened there. On the other side, in our kids' corner, talking about fitness and health. And I'm gearing up for a half marathon in July. Been ramping up my training for that and came across an interesting Substack related to being a parent and staying in shape. Last but not least, we have a guest interview this week. We have an interview with Matt over at Clockwise. So Matt Martin, co-founder and CEO of Clockwise. Clockwise is a productivity app that helps you make time, helps you get your calendar organized. And he's really done well. They've been really working hard lately in building a new type of scheduling software. So it'll be an interesting interview. We got into that. We also got into his life. Lives here in San Francisco. He's also a parent, 2 daughters. He's raised, I think, around over $50 million in venture for his business from some of the top brass of VCs. They also recently launched a Clockwise AI feature. So we'll talk a bit about that in the episode. And that is going to be our interview. So looking forward to today's show, getting back at it here. The summer is here in my mind. So we'll try to continue to keep these shows coming out. Thank you all for listening to the show last week. That's by far been our most successful show so far. So something's working in the zeitgeist of podcasting and interviewing founders and talking about a lot of the early stage stuff that doesn't get as much media coverage. So I'm excited, got a lot of great interviews coming up and a lot of great insights. So this is episode 10 of the Stretch 4 podcast. Let's get going. So first things first on this podcast this week, talking about some founder learnings. Last week, I was able to spend time at the FinovateSpring conference. Finovate is a conference that's been around for quite some time, I think since 2014. We participated in the FinovateSpring 2013 showcase or 2023 showcase, demonstrated with another 40 or so companies. We, unfortunately, Modern Tax, my startup, was not selected in the best of show winners. We did have some great competition, companies that are in some cases a lot further along than us as far as their product, as far as their fundraising and their life cycle. So I was inspired by a lot of companies. There's a company called Finovate who was selected best of show. I think they've raised almost 90 million in venture. They have a personalization platform that enables financial institutions to deliver best-in-class personalized digital experiences, and it was a very good demonstration. This conference is a conference focused on fintech, banking, and financial services. It's been around since 1994. We were selected as a scholarship recipient. Overall, great experience for me and my team. My team member, Chris Sayas was there with us, helping with the demonstration. So shout out to Chris. We ended up acquiring almost over 200 leads across all the different focus points with Modern Tax. So when you think about Modern Tax, we're a tech-enabled API solution to help get access to tax information. Tax information's historically been very hard to get access to, very slow to get access to. With some of the new technologies and with our expert network of tax and accounting designees, we have built out a solution in a way to get access to that information in a lot quicker fashion. So this conference was helpful for us. It really helped us have a open view of how the industry, financial services industry, thinks about our product, unlock tons of new ideas for our roadmap, as well as tons of new feedback for what we currently built out. So I was very, very excited, and I was had a very, very good time pitching. We had a 7-minute demonstration, took it right to the 7-minute mark. We were able to get through both an end user experience if you're an individual and you were using modern tax in the background, and also if you are a business and you're using modern tax in the back end. So definitely had a great time. Startups, non-bank lenders, large banks, community and credit union banks were there. A lot of venture capitalists there, a lot of strategic large corporations. Actually, our highest interest at the event, which kind of gives that signal of always trying to sell to the enterprise. Some strategics and large corporations really liked our demonstration, and probably when you think about the ranking, they had this kind of cool tool they used to allow you to rank who was most interested. So they basically applied some, logic to the fact that if someone was at your pitch, right, that's one kind of, level. They were like, came to watch you pitch, but also if they came to your booth, also if they opted in to be reminded about your pitch, is also a level of engagement. So we had the top most engaged people there for our conference were from 2 Fortune 500 companies. So we're very excited about that, and we hope that that continues to matriculate and develops as we get ready to ramp up into the summertime. So that's the good side, and the good learning is try to get to conferences or industry trade shows. Try to present. My rule of thumb is if you're paying to play, you should be on a panel. You should have a very well located trade show booth, or you should be able to demo your product. If it's free, like it was for us, definitely try to get in front of as many people as you can. I will say Finovate has been, of all the conferences that I do go to, they were the best at allowing you to track the leads that you were getting. So I have a dashboard now with all the folks we talked with, all the folks that were interested, all the back channel conversations we had with those folks. So it's super critical. And it was just me and Chris say yes that were there. So we only had 2 people on site, but we were able to gather a lot of data around who was interested. On the downside of the demonstration, I will say this. One of the things I've learned as being a founder of a company now, this is my 3rd company, try to work with customers that already have products in market. When you work with companies that are in stealth mode or trying to be kind of not trying to expose what they're doing or not really trying to make a name for themselves yet, you do run into a lot of issues. Lots of these companies are very, very dogmatic in evaluating products and evaluating services. And what you learn as a startup founder is the quicker you get your product out in the market, the quicker it gets in the hands of actual users, the better you are. And secondarily, when you work with companies that are in stealth mode, when you work with companies that are still not ready to go yet, you always find yourself playing this like dog and pony show, because these sometimes can be customers that are very, very, aggressive with wanting to see and use your product, but then they don't match that aggression on the same end, right? They're not deploying it across tens of thousands of people. So they're kind of in the play state. And everything that they give you, everything that they kind of tell you, they want everything to be kind of under this level of transparency. And I've made mistakes in the past, but this one, in particularly with our demonstration, we were trying to obviously validate to to the customers or to the prospects at this event how our product works. And we thought what we had was a good use case. We let something slip out that probably shouldn't have been included in our pitch. And we had a customer that is actually in stealth had a fit about it. And so it's a very much a learning experience for me, because if you have a customer that's in market, their product is out there, they're actually using it and deploying it, they're never going to have a problem with you kind of using them as an example for your product, right? It's kind of like a 2-end street, right? Like we demonstrate the use case of our product within your system, and you can leverage demonstrating how you're able to get what you get through our platform. And that's like widely understood in corporate America. Companies do that all the time. But when you have companies that are in stealth mode, or maybe first-time founders, people that really don't understand, like nobody gives a fuck about your stealth mode product, it can be difficult. And so that was a learning experience for me. I take it on the chin. we're still moving strong, but everybody is not really ready for what startups really are. A lot of people still like to live in this facade of stealth startup. If you go to LinkedIn right now, it's pretty fascinating. If you go to LinkedIn and you type in stealth startup, it's like there's such a large amount of people that are in this bucket, right? It's almost like the majority of people that are doing startups. It would be a 13,000 person company. And whether if you are a stealth founder, no digs, but just like get your product out to market. Like one of the most real things that you feel when you're a founder is shipping shit and getting it out and seeing what people think about it. Because you really find out a lot about yourself, your team, your product, and everything. And so I see a lot of founders just sit in this stealth mode. And some people, especially in the Bay where there's so much money, there people work at all these big companies, and it's like this whole game of like people trying to get people that are working at big companies to start things. And like, I don't think it's bad to be in stealth mode for like a couple months until you get your footing. But like, you got people that have been in stealth mode for 5 years, right? Like, and it's kind of like, what are you really doing? What are you building? I think there should be a cap. Like LinkedIn should say, you can be in stealth mode for 6 months, but after that, you got to actually say what you're doing and be public. And I think it's kind of very much intriguing because you have two worlds in startup land. You have the stealth mode world. You have the world of just the back channel world of, oh, they're working on something crazy. They can't talk about it yet. And really, it's just a product that like 10 other companies already have in market, right? This is my case for the what I'm talking about. Like, there's 10 other companies doing exactly what you're doing that are already in market, already have customers, and already cranking. And then there's the build in public type folks, right? So I honestly was like 2 years ago, if you had asked me, I would have probably been more of a fan of the stealth mode people than the build in public people. But I think it's flipped. I think it's flipped because the market is clearly, it is rewarding people who ship and get to market anything. Like we look at the fastest growing product in the world in the history of technology. OpenAI is clearly a product that was shipped before, and it took them a long time, but their end product was not perfect, right? People still used it. So I do find it honestly harder to work with people in this mode. So many of these people come to me because like we're a startup. And so if you're building anything around tax or data, like you might hear about our company through back channel and you want to come to us and you want to say like, can you do this? And then like, I'm always like asking the question of like, is your product in market? And sometimes I'm maybe not as firm as I should be, but it's like, if your product's not in market, like there's no point for us to talk or have a conversation, because at the end of the day, it's going to be 3-6 months before you even really get value out of our product. And you're going to waste a lot of my fucking time. So that is something that I learned through this presentation. All the companies that we talked to that were at this event, they had products in market. You could buy those products. You could use those products. And that makes all the difference in this ecosystem. So that's my rant. So if you're a stealth mode startup, no diss, but get out of stealth mode. Ship your product, get it in market, see if people like it, and then you can iterate, pivot, or whatever down the line. Moving on to the next topic, company that I actually have used in the past 6 months. And it was funny because I used this product and it was a little bit harder to get going than I would have thought it would have been for a product like this. So the company is Plastiq. Plastiq files for bankruptcy and they inked a deal with a company called Priority. Plastiq, we're talking about it because this is a B2B focused podcast, and Plastiq was a B2B payments business. It had a last valuation of around $480 million in a now canceled SPAC deal. Really why this is important is because a lot of B2B players as well as B2B fintechs. I mean, I was just at Finovate, which is a fintech financial institutions conference. And one of the biggest things you hear more is like consumer finance is struggling. But this announcement shows that B2B businesses can struggle as well. I think the first thing that Plastiq became known for was this credit card to ACH payment model, which already obviously is a default risk. It's why you don't see that offering. It's basically you can pay someone with a credit card and they can get paid with ACH. And this company was kind of designed to be the arbitrager to kind of originate those types of payments and make money on the back end. Officially, they are billed as an SMB credit card payments company. They'd raised about 140 million in funding over their lifetime from some investors like Kleiner Perkins, B Capital Group, and Top Tier Capital. And it didn't work out. And I don't think it's anything, bad about the company. I mean, startups go out of business all the time. It's a part of the game. The market changes. But I do think that it is a very another signal for the small business market, right? Where if you are serving small business owners, I think generally they're considered more risky. And so building products for them can be much more difficult. And you take on a little bit more complexity than a lot of times a lot of people want. Elliot Buchanan, who's a guy I had the chance to meet a couple times here around the city. This guy, he was at this company, running this company for, quite some time. He's been at it for about 12 years with this model. And it looks like it just didn't work out. Funds weren't there. And it's unfortunate. These are realities in the startup ecosystem. They happen, won't be the last, not the first. But definitely Plastiq had a market. I think there is a market for this payment arbitrage that sometimes many business owners face. In my case, making payments on a credit card that people wanted to receive on an ACH, which I don't think there's anything wrong with as long as it's being done in a streamlined fashion. But in this case, unfortunately for Plastiq, they weren't able to get to market. They weren't able to get marketed on the next round of funding, which was the SPAC. And they're being sold for pennies on the dollar based on the valuations and historically what they'd raised. So the learning is, as a startup founder, revenue is always king in these payments businesses, definitely lower margin. So you have to really be risk averse in those areas. And it seems like with fintech, specifically B2B, you're going to have to move even up market, right? You can't just be selling to every small business and expect it to be a profitable business. Last topic today before we get into our interview with Matt and Clockwise at Clockwise, wanted to shed some light on a content piece I came across from the new fatherhood Substack. So obviously I'm a father, son's about 15 months old, announcing it here on the podcast. My wife and I are expecting our second son in October, growing this Parker family, this Parker empire. It seems like every year now, but I think one of the things that this piece that I came across was in Fitness and in Health, which was a partner piece from Kevin McGuire and Jeremy Keene, released it. I'll link it in the show notes. It talks about running. Running is something that I've actually started to really do more, like preparing here for the SF Marathon in July. So I've been ramping up my performance and my training, targeting goals of targeting anywhere between a 9:30 to 9:45 average mile. So right now I'm kind of hitting on around a 10-mile clip. I'll do around 9:45 to 9:50. So trying to continue to shed seconds off my mile. I'm not really like an expert. Like supposedly now I'm knowing I'm supposed to start these races off slow and begin to gain steam over time. So that will take an adjustment for me. But this piece was very interesting because it talked a bit about running and how it became a part of this gentleman's life and like how it's always been a part. But it was like, it kind of really hit me because, I played college basketball. We were up the track every morning, 6 a.m., 2-3 days a week, running full on sprints around the track, right? Like, I think at that point, like guys on the team would do like 6:15 miles. I think maybe we had a couple guys doing sub 6 miles, like on the basketball team. And I was probably, I think peak around that time, I was around a 7:30 mile. And so running was something I never loved. I still don't think I love it today. There's another, I'll also link this, kind of David Goggins, who I'm not a David Goggins snob. Like I like some of his stuff. I don't agree with all of his stuff, but his day-to-day routine kind of makes sense where he's like, I get the running out of the way every day because it's what I hate the most. And I do think running, especially as a parent, it is kind of like something that I correlate with being a parent, right? It's like every day you can't get to the gym. Every day you can't do 2 hours of fitness and weights. Now I try to get as much of that in as I can, but I do realize with my weight as I get older, it is harder and harder to maintain a weight, right? Like I'd gotten up to about 250 at a certain point. I'd like to be in the 220, 225, 235 range, right? Like that's consistently where I want to be. And I want to keep that, right? Like in my mid 30s, I want to be able to say, like, I'm anywhere between 225 to 235 any given time of the year as I get older. And I realize as you get older, it's harder to maintain that, right? Metabolism gets slower, you put on more weight. And I think running is something that, as much as I don't like it, it's something that's like, it's like basic physical conditioning, right? It's like like all humans could do is run, since the beginning of time. And so I think keeping a consistent running regimen has been super interesting for me to build because I've never been a long distance guy. Like, I mean, I'm at about 10 and a half miles a week on my long run. And I've never ran more than that, each week sequentially, it's my longest run. And I'm realizing, like, how do I feel after a 9-mile run? How do you feel after a 10-mile run? How am I going to feel after a half marathon? So it's very interesting. This piece highlighted it correlated it with fatherhood and just how this individual, Jeremy, got super fat. Like I think one of the harder things to just say is that a lot of people are just fat. And that's just the fact. As you get older, you see more and more fat people, but there's a point where you don't. There's a point where people who are overweight or fat just aren't around anymore. And it's an unfortunate circumstance. So I think building a runner's habit, building an ability to like run 10 miles is something I think is really important for me, at least, because you just don't have the time you don't have the time, right? It's like, if I go run 10 miles, it's going to take me an hour and a half and then I'm done. A lot of times going to the gym every day, which I still try to do a lot, is difficult. So this is a very interesting piece. It's like, this is something that just came out of nowhere, right? I wasn't really looking for this resource, so I wanted to highlight it. I'll share it in the show notes if anybody's looking for inspiration on just trying to maintain a level of fitness that allows you to do other things like be a parent, run a company. Being even at like this fintech conference last week, you're like walking all over the place. You're moving around. Like you got to kind of be at a certain level of fitness to even really just do life. So it's quite deep piece on running and how this guy kind of reshaped his life just on running. So I'll link that to the show notes. We got the interview with Matt Martin at Clockwork. Excited about that. Thank you all for listening. This is Matt Parker. For podcast, I have a guest, Matt Martin, who is the CEO and founder of Clockwise. Clockwise is helping you manage your calendar and stay on top of your calendar. And they have built all types of tools. Obviously, we'll get into some machine learning, AI related stuff, but it's a product that is driven to help you optimize your life. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. And this will get confusing for all your listeners as we go, Matt.
Yep. Matt and Matt, right? First guest with the same first name, and I go with Matt, not Matthew. Great to have you on the show today, Matt. Maybe I think to kick it off, obviously your background, and we'll get into that, but I would love to you to talk about. I know Clockwise is helping you optimize your calendar, and so I think this is something that has become very, very important as we manage our time. How do you approach your day-to-day life? Like, how much time are you optimizing and blocking off of your calendar? Are you like avoiding things like social media and distractions? What is your approach to optimizing your calendar on a day-to-day as a founder CEO?
Yeah, so people might be surprised that I'm not as rigid as they might think. So I mean, part of the premise of Clockwise as we started is that one of the obstacles to getting the time that you need to get your job done, assuming you're motivated to do your work, which is a different issue, but assuming you're motivated and you want to accomplish things that are high importance in your work context, one of the primary blockers is that people are asking of your time constantly. And so time has kind of entered over the last 20 years into a shared space. And it's kind of weird and counterintuitive because, for me, it's how I spend my day. It's when I get to see my kids, it's highly personal. But if you don't help to manage how other people have expectations of your time and what they're asking of you and how to flow that, that's where things can really start to break apart because you start to get that feeling of being on the hamster wheel of constantly trying to keep up. And so for me personally, stepping outside of Clockwise as a product, what I try to do is I a how deep do you want me to go, Matt? Because I could go on this for a while.
I mean, go as deep as you feel like
All right,
people would love to hear. Give it,
I'm a
channel,
productivity nerd.
channel your Cal Newport.
Yeah.
Where you
All right.
read that stuff. Channel that for us.
I love it. All right. So I am obviously a productivity nerd. So I'll try to keep this engaging and not bore you. But it starts first from thinking critically about what is kind of the average flow of your week. So you want to take a look at your calendar, and depending on your role, if you're a manager, if you're an IC, if you're a manager of multiple teams like I am, look at kind of the cadence of how you want your week to operate. And so we at Clockwise, we have a Monday morning meeting every week with the whole team. We have demos on Friday, and I have Thursday as kind of my staff day. We have a staff meeting in the afternoon, and I try to hit one-on-ones with each member of my leadership team. I try, although I bend to customers, I try to make Tuesdays about customer meetings, and I try to keep Wednesday largely open. And so that kind of forms like the general structure of my week. And then obviously things don't stay that way. Every Sunday night or Monday morning, I send my team an email with how am I doing? Red, yellow, green. What are loosely the top 3 to 5, sometimes maybe a little bit more, things that I'm focusing on that week. And then, once you kick that off, I also report in that email on how the last week went. Did I accomplish those things? This helps with communication with everybody else and expectation management about where I'm spending my time. It also helps to share some alignment, if I have a task with somebody else or coordination or somebody's wondering what I'm doing. But for me personally, it's also just a nice ritual to sit down, think about what I need to do that week. And then I look at my calendar to see, do I have time to do that stuff? Do I need to, I'm not, this may surprise some folks. I like time blocking. I'm not a hardcore time blocker where I go, this is where I'm going to do this task, unless it's really regimented. It's like a board meeting that I need to get the slides out or something like that. What I like to do more is kind of, finger in the air, look at how much heads down time I have in the week relative to what I need for the project work. If it's more about meeting with folks, great. Let's get those meetings on the calendar. If it's more about heads down work or I need to think through strategy, let's just make sure that I have enough focus time in my week to do that. And I'll make sure that time is allocated as such. Now, best laid plans, sometimes it still gets eaten up, but at least I start the week with knowing that I have approximately what I need. And then as people take that time away from me, I can be more critical about, hey, is this higher priority than what I've already allotted it for? And sometimes it is, and sometimes that means in my next week plan email, I say, I didn't get to this, but it's because I did this other higher priority item. So that's kind of the general outlines and contours of how I organize my own time.
No, that's amazing. That's great. I think that puts it in plain sight. You mentioned board meetings. Just a question: how do you structure around that? You all have raised a few rounds of funding now from some big names. I'm assuming board meetings are quite critical. Are those on a monthly basis, quarterly basis? And how do you organize that? And so when you do head into that, you have all the information you need, and you're optimizing around being highly transparent about the business and where everything is. And how strict have been board meetings been for you in your experience?
Yeah. So we're kind of in a tweener phase for this, where in the early days of board meetings, we've always been relatively formalistic about our board meetings just for good habits and hygiene. But in the early days, it's a little bit more about, like, they're a little bit less critical because you have less kind of company management issues, and it's more about issue spotting. And honestly, a lot of early board meetings, at least for me, are beneficial internally and less about the board meeting itself. It forces kind of a rigor and cadence of checking in. And then at later stage, it becomes much more operational. You have a comp committee, you have a compliance committee, you have auditing, you have you have people that you really need to report out to and get a good view on. We're kind of like somewhere in between that right now. Our board meetings have gotten a little bit formalistic, but I start with, just to broaden your question a little bit, I think it's really easy to lose sight as a founder, especially in the early days, that board meetings are for you. Like they're for the company. They're not to go and make a board member happy. They're only valuable if they're valuable to the company. And I was not good about that in the early days, and I still don't think I'm great about it because your board is largely comprised of people that you had to pitch to give you money. And so there's this weird shift that happens where it goes from you have to impress them, you have to show them, of course, everything honestly, authentically when you're pitching, but in the best light possible. You're trying to sell, you're trying to get them to buy into the company, and then it switches and they're a member of your team. And that switch can be easy to lose, and board meetings can become performative where you're going and you're basically repitching the same people. And that, I think, is one thing to really watch for, and make sure that they're useful to you. And so one specific example of this is we used to have board meetings on basically a 10-week cadence, because I got advice from a board member, and I think it's good advice, which is like, there's something about around 10 weeks where like it's just a bit about 2 months, where if you're an outside member who's only popping in that free, like, that's like the maximum amount you can extend while still keeping context in your head as an outside board member. So it's like, all right, 10 weeks sounds like a good cadence. But man, 10 weeks is just off of the quarterly cadence. So internally, it becomes this weird kind of cadence of production of materials, because like we have a quarterly kickoff, we have quarterly planning, we have yearly planning, and then the board meeting sits on top of that as a cadence. And so I kind of said at one point, just nuts to this, like, we're just going to do it quarterly because that fits in with us, and it creates less work. It creates less, it's still a lot of work, but it creates less duplicative work. So that, from a cadence perspective and from a kind of ethos perspective, that's where we're at. I'm happy to dive deeper on anything related to board management, though, if it's of interest.
That's a very interesting topic, but maybe transitioning, getting into who you are as a person, right? Like, you started Clockwise in 2016, but prior to that, you worked at Related IQ, which was acquired by Salesforce. But even further back, you were kind of on the Minnesota political scene. You had a publication called MN Publicist. That was something that got you started. Maybe talk a bit about that and draw those correlations to kind of where you are now. I mean, I was a political science major myself. Now I'm in Silicon Valley, starting companies, creating content and media. Maybe talk a bit about that trajectory and how it's benefited you as you deal with like things like board. And you're essentially, like, I feel like startup founders were kind of like politicians, right? Like, we're trying to pitch our thing to customers, to investors, but then we're also trying to like show that we're physically responsible with the allocation of money that we get. And we're also trying to prove that with things like that. So maybe talk about the correlation of politics and now into the Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. My background is a little bit funky. It certainly would have been much more economical from a time and money perspective just to get a degree in computer science and skip law school, because so look, like, when you look at my trajectory, I think it says more about me than it says about the skill set I've developed to be where I am. And what I mean there is, like, I'm as corny as it sounds, I'm a lifelong learner. Like, I like learning about new areas. The reason that I got involved in tech and got involved in politics are both kind of weirdly interrelated, just from a personality perspective. Like, I really like driving change and driving impact to people. And on the tech side, I mean, I tinker with computers. Like, it's not represented on my resume, but like, I was always a computer nerd. I built websites in middle school and through the 90s, and built gaming computers. And like, I always loved that side. And there's something about the creative element of being able to put fingers to keyboard and push something out in the world that actually impacts somebody. And I think we have to be humble in the tech community. Mostly it's a much smaller scope impact, but much higher speed than politics. Politics can be a much larger scope impact, but it's much slower. And it's also much less creative by design. I mean, democracy is designed to have checks and balances that kind of skew towards what the widest percentage of the populace needs and wants. And with software and tech, you can kind of take a moment of passion and try to develop something that's much narrower, but much more driven at driving an impact in a smaller scale towards people on a regular basis. And so it's a little bit of the same motivation. It's a little bit of just me being curious about stuff and, running at different things until I figured out where my real passion is, which is in building companies. But the skill set overlap, I have to admit, is It's minor. Like the actual law school learnings that I had. I mean, I'd like to pretend that I use my legal degree for document review, for contract review at Clockwise, but like,
Yeah.
we have people who are actual lawyers do that. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's
There's
like,
counsel that's handling all that stuff. You're not really the last thing you want to be doing is playing lawyer when you're a startup founder. I feel like.
especially one that has no corporate. I mean, I was a litigator, so like I did business litigation. I don't like corporate side. I don't know as well, and I haven't
Yeah.
practiced in 12 years. So it's like,
You pass that on, and the Wilson Sonsini's and Fenwicks make.
that's right. And then your eyes pop at the bills, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe I should use my law degree, but
Yeah, that's where legal is like it's like great like legal. I'm all my I's are dotted, my T's are crossed, my money's raised, and everything, and then you get the bill, and you're like, wow, like this is why maybe I could have cut corners and saved hundreds of thousands of dollars, but that's the process of being a startup founder. But again, maybe that takes us to our next segue with Clockwise. I'm sure you all, and I know you guys are utilizing AI. Things like legal are kind of professional services seem to be the first place that or the first thing that is going to be disrupted. Obviously, knowledge workers, engineering. How have you all like you guys have been going at it since 2016? When before AI was kind of primitive. I mean, OpenAI really got started in 2016. So that's a 7 year trajectory. Now it's at the top of every news cycle. It's the biggest buzz in Silicon Valley, probably since I think it's even eclipsed crypto at this point with just the amount of time and attention and money that's going there. Talk about the trajectory there and how AI first is one useful for your product. Automating a calendar seems to be direct use case, but also just the boom bust cycle of AI and what you think about it in today's terms.
yeah, this is a topic that we've been thinking a lot about at Clockwise. We actually just announced on Monday, and knowing that the recording will probably go out a little bit later. That was Monday, May 8th, a announcement about Clockwise AI. So we're investing in this directly, but outside of, and I'm more than happy to talk about anything Clockwise, but outside of Clockwise itself, it's interesting, yeah, that period of time over which Clockwise has been developed. So we did get started in very late 2016, and at that time, I don't know if people recall, but there were a couple companies like X.AI, Clara
Yes.
Labs.
Yep.
They're trying to build, and for people who aren't familiar, these were companies that were trying to build a digital assistant. So you'd have like, I forget the names they used, but they actually gave them
It's Amy.
names.
I think Amy was the first name, and
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's right.
yeah, Dennis Mortensen. I've talked to him a few times, but it was like Amy, and just plug it into your email, and
Yep.
it would schedule your calendar. It was pretty fascinating that was happening 7 years ago.
Yep.
Maybe a little too early, but
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think it was too early. I like Dennis and his team. They're awesome. I mean, I have a lot of respect for what they were doing. I think their vision was probably correct, but the technology wasn't there,
yeah,
and they learned that the hard way. I mean, they had to do a lot of human side, and they just couldn't quite crack it. And I'm sure Dennis has very interesting stories about the why. But we started Clockwise with that happening, and so our perspective was, we do not want to anthropomorphize Clockwise. We do not want to create an assistant. We do not want to create the expectations that Clockwise operates as an assistant. And so
Mhm.
Clockwise to date has been something that you plug your calendar in, you can OAuth, and we analyze the calendar. We do a lot of hard, heavy lifting in terms of analyzing what meetings are at bad times, helping you get the better schedule, but you're always in control. We never create an interface where it's like, text Clockwise what you want to do and we'll do it. We'll surface conflicts, we'll surface bad meetings, we'll help you get them flexible, we'll help you get a better schedule, but we're an agent acting on your behalf, not an assistant. And I think finally, so just for context for guests, I won't get into the political side of this or throw any shade, but I was not a big believer in Web3 or crypto. I'm not somebody to jump out of hype cycle quickly. I think generative AI is as big of a breakthrough as people are making it to be. I think it has similar vibes to the early days of the web. Now there are huge differences. The early web, and why I found it really fun, was a bunch of nerds with no money testing out what's possible, largely sharing ideas. It's crazy that even the browser was created from a space where you could always view the source code. If it was a corporate entity, it would never have done that. We're AI is coming up in age with tons of money in the dominant industry in our economy with huge players vying for it. And so I think it's a seismic shift, but the underlying currents are very, very different. And so it's tough to predict where and how this will land. But for us, we see now, 6, 7 years later, the opportunity to create that calendar assistant, because the generative AI, I think, is almost good enough to do that. And specifically with how it interacts with humans and reasons and communicates. The scheduling side requires Clockwise's advanced scheduling engine, because the generative AI is just, they cannot, they don't hook in directly to calendar yet, but they also don't have the ability to reason deterministically about times. I'm sure everybody's heard about hallucinations and experienced them. The last thing you want is for an AI to hallucinate a time that doesn't work for people and schedule it. And so we are working right now to pair it very tightly by utilizing the strengths, which is communication, talking to you in natural language, be able to reason about your intent, what do you want, and then push that intent to Clockwise's scheduling engine, so you can create something magical where, literally we're using this internally, where I can say, I need to meet with my VP product, my VP marketing this afternoon. Usually impossible because they're already booked. And the AI will help understand the intent of that. Then we'll marry it with who those people are, suck in their schedules, and then Clockwise will reason about what conflicts might be able to move in order to open up that time. It's incredibly powerful. And I think that we're in the very early innings of people figuring out how to leverage the technology.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that kind of brings me to my next question. You all are focused primarily on the founder CEO persona, right? I think this is something that obviously, at least now, as a founder CEO myself, makes a lot of sense, right? If I could have some tool that optimizes my schedule for internal meetings, but also external, right? Yeah, whether it's customers, investors, media, like trying to prioritize, like who should I be talking to, who should be able to suck that time out of my calendar. Is that still? I mean, that's the critical end user of the product. Is that how you all distribute this product to companies and teams? Because now you're an enterprise company, but does it start with the founder CEO? Do they have to really get on board with this mission for
No,
to adopt it?
yeah, no, it's a very interesting question. Our seed users, and this is one thing that's been complicated about Clockwise. We're a product-led growth company, so anybody can bring it in to their company. And our seed users, that original user inside of a domain or company, can be anyone. And we find that there's a little bit of magic when it starts to be used in concentration by a team. And so it's not necessarily founder CEO. Now, if the company is small, it can be founder CEO, and it can be that founder CEO bring it in and be with their team. And, that could be a 10-person team total in the company, or it might even be, a larger company like 50, 70, 100 people, and the founder CEO is still bringing in. But at larger organizations like Uber, Netflix, Atlassian, our larger accounts that we work with, it's often a software engineer that brings it in, or maybe a software engineering manager or a PM. And then because the calendar is inherently viral, you're meeting with other people, we do a pretty good job of spreading across that team. And if the team starts to use it together, that's where the real magic happens, because then we can optimize as a whole across everyone. And so if you're an engineering manager, it's similar to the use case you just described, which is it's great for them to help balance heads down time with their meetings, with their one-on-ones, with cross-functional syncs, helping to, they're talking lesser, but, they're talking to some external parties like recruits or maybe sometimes customers. So it's helpful for them to balance, but then for their team, just ICs, they get the benefit too, because now Clockwise is looking out for their afternoon. I like an engineer is like, hey, I want to go heads down for the whole afternoon on this project. We will help make sure that their schedule accommodates that. And so it's the seed user dynamic. It usually starts kind of at a team level, and then it'll bubble across multiple teams, and eventually we get consolidated into, usually the IT department owns us, but we're very popular among R&D departments, engineers, product managers, designers. And then we kind of branch out a bit into operations groups, love us, a little bit of marketing, and we have pockets of strong usage around sales teams, but it requires a little bit more education, because Our
Mhm.
product is geared towards providing heads down time. And for sales, heads down time really means call time. Like they
Yep.
need to generate revenue for the business, but it's a pretty general use tool. So we tend to kind of spread across the breadth of a company use cases.
Mhm. And with building Clockwise with this bottoms up product led growth marketing approach, you all have raised from some top, uh, I would call tier one investors, Greylock, Excel, Co2. How did you design your process around that? I mean, obviously, when you started a company, there were success stories in this market which helped, but obviously, productivity has become very, very there's a lot of companies building productivity solutions. How are you able to establish a footprint that you guys are differentiated in this particular space? And how have you continued to reinvent that category and to build this category defining opportunity?
Yeah, it's so this space is actually filled with more tombstones than successful outcomes. I mean, if you look back at calendaring time management, you'd struggle to think of a single company that has really had an exciting outcome. Sunrise was eventually like that's what a lot of people think of, and Sunrise was great application, no shade at all, but
Yeah.
the outcome
I
there was
love Sunrise,
exciting.
but it just couldn't survive the
Yeah. Acompli was probably so Acompli eventually was acquired by Microsoft and then became Outlook Mobile.
Mhm.
Timeful was acquired by Google. Like it's hard to get to escape velocity with time management because you're working on top of somebody else's platform and it's largely soft ROI. Even though it's an organization's biggest asset, both philosophically and in output, but also just in terms of dollars and cents because they spend the most on payroll out of anything.
Yep.
It's still soft ROI because it's like, it's kind of squishy. It's not an essential need. And so that actually works against you in this space a bit. But the way that productivity software companies become large is if they create aggregate value for the business. And so what I think had been a big shift in our approach from prior approaches is that we were very business and company focused from day one. And so to this day, we don't have a consumer variant of the product. You can't, and it actually, I think is probably to our detriment at this point, but you can't go sign up with just a regular Gmail account. It
Yep.
has to be a Google Workspace account. And that's because we're looking at optimizing inside the organization. There are actually technical reasons. It's not just something that we do to
Yeah.
screen out people. We need to look at the domain's calendar system and start to look across multiple individuals in order to work. And so I think that initial approach was the primary differentiator is that here's a system that it feels consumery in that individuals can come in and get benefit from it, but it's
Mhm.
primarily geared at generating aggregate value for a business, and we deliver it by looking at the business as a whole and the calendar system as a whole. And that continues to be one of the one of the primary differentiators. And I think our secret sauce and why we've been successful to date is that we are helping to enable individuals get a better schedule, but we're doing that by looking across everybody, at least everybody that signs up for us inside of an organization. And so we're delivering automatically hundreds, if not thousands of hours back into the organizational schedule. So while that is soft ROI, strictly speaking, we can go to that organization, whether it's the engineering leader or the IT leader or whomever it may be, and say, hey, look, we are delivering today tons of value. And if you might squint at that and say, well, are they looking at Twitter with that extra time? Or are they actually doing work? You
Yep.
can't argue with the vast quantity of the numbers. And so it's like, hey, look, put a discount on it. But like our price still works, even if you
Yep.
think that it's a massive discount. So I think that's one of the big differentiators.
Mhm. And really, really tightening up that B2B approach. Always interested to see products like that that are focused primarily on business emails at registration or at sign up. So we have
One thing
few
there,
more blocks.
Matt, just
Yep.
to double down on that, I think for folks who are listening to this, who are either founders or inside companies, I think one of the things that you can find yourself kind of wandering in the wilderness for a bit is that productivity, B2B productivity software these days is almost exclusively product led. So it's rare these days to find productivity B2B software that's sold through a traditional enterprise sale direct to the buyer. People expect that they can come in and try it. People expect they can try it for free. People expect that they can come in and experiment with it. And I think it's very difficult to create a piece of software that's traditional B2B sales if you're in the productivity area. And a little bit of advice for anybody who's doing this is that you don't get lost in the fact that PLG, product led growth, feels a little bit more consumer oriented. It's still a B2B business. It's just the method of acquisition is shifting towards acquiring users by product led and then scaling those into organizational deploys. And so it does add some complexity in all regards. It's not, I think a lot of people look at PLG and like, oh, this is great. I don't have to talk to people. And it's more complicated, not less, in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great advice for the folks. Most of the folks listening are B2B focused in their initiatives. So transitioning here, while we have a few more minutes, a lot of the technology, the product, the sales, the fundraising stuff is widely talked about. But as a founder, essentially it is a job of performance, and you are kind of essentially classed as an athlete, right? Being able to have the mental fortitude to go days, years to perform. You obviously are seem to be kind of in the club of the high output management process from Andy Grove, but also some of the, you mentioned that Deep Work is another book that's highly affected you. Maybe discuss just how you think about personal performance to just get up every day, hit the ground running, deliver on objectives. Obviously, we could talk a little bit about the parenting side as well. You have a family, you have a wife, but how have these types of resources influenced you and set up a framework for success?
Yeah, I think that sport is actually a very good analogy for what we do in a lot of ways, and especially for the founder journey, because I think it's easy for people who are not athletes, and I am not one. Like I love to ride. I love to ride bikes. I love to work out, but like I am not an athlete. I wasn't in any sort of sports in college. But
Yeah.
people see the athleticism of athletes. I think it's largely naively they can think it's largely physical, and a huge component of the performance is physical. But it's you really can't underestimate the mental side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hear top tier athletes talk about performance over time, there's a great interview with Kobe Bryant where he's reflecting on self doubt. It's a presser, and he's getting some questions about, the Lakers have been on a losing streak, and he said, look, like self doubt is just not, it's not valuable, because what am I going to do with that? I have to get up tomorrow morning and I'm going to perform the best of my abilities. I've got to go hard. It's a new day, and I'm going to lose some and I'm going to win some. And self-doubt doesn't help me perform tomorrow. What helps me perform is looking optimistically at the future and what we can accomplish over time. And I think that mentality of even the best teams on the planet lose games, and it's about continuing forward. It's about learning. It's about improving. It's about improving how the team dynamics work. It's about improving your personal performance over time and not getting stuck in that cycle of self-doubt and really kind of wallowing that it can become. And so for me, I had a piece of early advice from another founder. It has echoes of Kobe's advice, but it's in a much nerdier construct. He was saying to me, one of the most important things you can do is you're on this boat, you're on this journey, it's open water, it's open sea, it's really ambiguous. There are a lot of waves. And the best thing you can do for yourself is try to control the amplitude of those waves. Because if they're shallow waves, the amount of effort and distance you have to travel is actually much, much lower than if they're really big waves you're going up and down. And what he meant by that is control your ups and downs. Try to control the psychology of this game, where you're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have really bad days. You're going to have really great days. But try to create some mental fortitude and distance around those ups and downs where you can observe them, you can see them, but you're not riding that wave the whole distance. Another analogy is instead of being on the roller coaster, you're standing on the side watching the roller coaster. And the more you can get to that place where you are creating some distance between you, and it doesn't mean disengagement. It doesn't mean lack of passion. It doesn't mean lack of drive. It just means being able to get to a place where you see and you can spot, okay, this is a bad day. And like, I'm going to feel shitty about that, but I'm going to get up tomorrow and I'm going to keep going. And what can I learn from that? It's a hard place to get. It's easy to say because these journeys are so personal, and so much of our personal self-worth and how peers see us is tied up in the company. But I think it's so, so critical. And so I start from there for any sort of lessons for a founder is figure out, how best to manage your own psychology because it's going to pay dividends. And then bridging into Andy Grove, this becomes more and more important over time because one of the observations that Andy Grove has in his book, High Output Management, is that being a manager is all about creating leverage for the organization. And as organizations grow, speed decreases, but leverage increases. And so as a manager, as a startup founder and CEO, as you grow the organization, the amount of leverage you have in terms of increase the capacity, increase the velocity of the organization is going to increase as the organization increases. Because now you're working through other leaders, you're working through leaders who have teams under them. And so really thinking about how you can manage your psychology so that you show up ready to lead and ready to drive that leverage in the most tactically valuable way. It's the easiest thing in the world to wake up in the morning in a bad mood, get in a one-on-one with a leader and be like, why the hell are you doing it this way? This is messed up. This is what you should do. And that might be the right advice if you were sober about it, but it's probably not. It's probably probably better to give leverage for giving that person your intent and guidance. And so I think a lot about those as paired. How can I show up to be my best? How can I help the team build the culture of resilience? Making sure that they're seeing the journey. Making sure that we show up and we push as hard as we can for this game, but recognize that we can't win every single one. And then how do I give guidance and intent to those around me so that I create the leverage that we can all be better together?
No, that's amazing, and I think that gives me good vibes on how those early in the week, coming off a weekend management discussions where you're just hit with so much shit. It's just like you just walk on everybody. It's kind of like good to catch yourself. Last few questions while I have you here. You're based here in San Francisco. You're married. What is your home setup like? Parenting is something that we talk about. I became a father a little over a year ago, so it's obviously
congratulations.
Trajectory, yes, change its trajectory as a startup founder. Prioritization of time, really this productivity stuff really comes full cycle when you got kids. What's your current setup? How many kids? Do you all do childcare? Are they young kids, or how does it work for you?
Yeah, so I'm not too far ahead of you. I have 2.5-year-old twins. Yeah, twin girls. So it's been a ride.
Yeah.
We were in a apartment in Upper Mission. If you've been in any Victorian in San Francisco, you know exactly what this thing looks like. It's a single floor with one hallway that goes down back to the kitchen. It's nice. I mean, I feel very privileged, very lucky that we have a space has ample room, but it's not huge. We're on top of each other.
Yeah.
And my wife works as well. And so we do have a full-time nanny, which is huge.
Is it 5 days work week, or is it weekends? How does
5-day work week? 5-day work week. My wife's schedule is weird, so there's some flexibility. It's not always 9 to 5 for the nanny, and it's wild for those who don't live in the Bay Area. You may not be familiar with this, but if you have 2 kids, it's the same price. It's like the equivalent of childcare versus nanny. It's pretty close. The kids will probably go to preschool this year, but when we were looking at it, we were shocked at how expensive childcare was, and we're still shocked. But feel lucky that we can swing it. Not exactly easy, but it makes it work. And so that nanny comes in. I mostly work from home, so it can be a little bit hectic, but I got to tell you, man, I feel really lucky that the pandemic happened when it did, actually, as weird as that is to say out loud, because I was one of these founders where I thought it was my job to always be the first person in the office and the last person to leave. And we're, it's early days startup, we're hard driving, and we still are, but it meant long hours. I was often not home for dinner. I was often home late. And being that in the pandemic, we were forced out of that office situation, I learned to yield that flexibility as a benefit. And I don't think I ever would have gotten out of that mentality. We would have had kids, and I would have still been late nights, and it would have stretched us thin, and it would have been tough. And now, there's some days where the nanny's done at 5, and Ashley, my wife, is still at the hospital, and I have to stop. Like there's no choice. I got to stop. I got to take care of the kids.
Yeah.
And I don't feel guilty about that anymore. That's what I got to do. And then I'll come back on later at night.
Yeah.
And then to your point, it's for some rigor in how I operate, because now I know that I can't just solve the problem by working harder or later. I've got to help other people see the problem. I've got to help delegate better. I've got to be more regimented in my time management. I've got to communicate better in terms of letting people know what's coming down the pipe so that, if I'm out or I'm offline, like they can deal with it. But, I also have the flexibility that I can pop off at 5 and come back on when the kids are down at, 7:38, and I can knock some stuff out. And so I think the total velocity of the organization is still equivalent. It's just that I've learned how to structure my own life and how to yield the flexibility of work from home to be able to manage the complexity of having kids.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's great. Matt, it's been a great show. Love to hear the Clockwise story. I'm excited to try out the product and test it out. Parting words for the audience. Obviously, they have a business email. Go sign up at Clockwise. Any other kind of things you'd like to shout out before we close?
Well, of course, Clockwise.ai or getclockwise.com both work. Sign up there. We are pushing out Clockwise AI right now. It's on a wait list, so you sign up now, you'll get in earlier. It's a fantastic product. You can get free. You can get started right now, experiment with it, play with it. It delivers a ton of value. So encourage everybody to do so. And then, hey, if anybody's listening to our show and they want to connect personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, Matt Martin. Shoot me a line, drop me a line. I'm always excited to talk about the founder journey. It's lonely out there for founders. It's tough. Build up a network for yourself among peers. It's inordinately useful to be able to shoot a text to complain to somebody else who's in your same situation. So I would say it's hard building a company. It's easy to get myopically focused on building, but try to help build that community around you, even if it's a few friends. It's really, really valuable as you grow.
Awesome. Matt, it's been great talking with you. We'll get this show out, and we're very excited to learn more about the Clockwise AI product once it gets rolled out for folks.
Awesome. Thanks, man. This has been fun.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Great having you on the show, man. Great interview with Matt Martin and Clockwise. Thank you for coming on the show, Matt. We really enjoyed that interview and your product. What's coming up for me here in the next few weeks? Obviously, always the Modern Tax Company is kind of what I do day to day, but the newsletter is kind of what I do on my nights, the newsletter in this podcast series. So definitely the newsletter, stretch4.substack.com is where you can find that at. So like, subscribe, comment, and share the newsletter. Trying to get back into my writing bag of kind of taking a break and really just focus on the podcast, but definitely got some new issues coming up. Definitely check out episode 9 from last week with Tanvi Surti. Also talked about the new chip accelerators, Bankruptcy. So getting great feedback again. That's been our best performing show so far. What we got going on, or what I got going on in the next few weeks. SF Tech Week is here this week. I will be attending a couple events. 3 I think I've submitted to attend. We'll figure out where that goes. Definitely looking forward to the A16Z and Stonk's Gen AI pitch competition. So there'll be a lot of generative AI companies there. And then the next week, I'm heading down to LA for a 3-day trip for the LA Techs Week. I know I'm definitely going to be at the Culture House, where a good friend of mine is a DJ. So I'll be down in LA from Thursday through Sunday next week. And then in June, my other trip that's on the calendar is the On-Ramp Insurance Conference, which is presented by Generator. It will be taking place June 21st through 23rd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So never been to Minneapolis. Going to go out to Minneapolis for 3 days next week. Would definitely, on the ask side, continue to subscribe to the newsletter, listen to the podcast. We'd love your review on Apple or on Spotify. If you're a listener of the show, we definitely love your feedback and your reviews there. Outside of that, that's all we got on the Stretch 4 podcast. This is Matt Parker. Thank you all for listening to episode 10. We got 10 down and we got hundreds more to go. That's all I got. Thank you. Bye-bye.